What's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 24/7. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. Fun show for you guys today. We've got the gang back together, Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough, after a bye week. I gave the guys last week off from the podcast. Last time we all potted together, we were literally in the car coming back from Madison. Guys, how are you? How was the bye week? Did you guys do anything fun?
Work.
No.
Why are you guys so boring? I went to Atlanta to watch the Chiefs-Falcons game on Sunday Night Football. You guys did absolutely nothing? I guess your parents. I guess it's different.
Yeah. I mean, I watched Michigan throw for 32 yards and somehow win a football game. I thought I was in 1920 for a minute there, but, what are you going to do?
Very Big Ten football.
Yeah. Lincoln Riley not having a good week. Nothing to see here with Bear Alexander, and then he's gone.
He's taking the shirt, as they say. He's redshirting, so they said he's taking the shirt.
That was a great
quote. That was the lingo.
That was a great quote. Shout out to the USC 24/7 site for breaking that news. We got a big game on Saturday. Number 4 Alabama, number 2 Georgia, 6:30 p.m. kickoff at Bryant-Denny Stadium. The first top 5 matchup, I believe, of the 2024 college football season. There's a lot of things I think that make this game intriguing. So I'll start my opening soliloquy here. Kirby Smart was a longtime assistant under Nick Saban. He's now the head coach at Georgia. And he's very much built the Bulldog program as an Alabama 2.0, right? He recruits like a madman, same as Saban, which leads to an overwhelming talent advantage on the field. That has played out really over the last 3 seasons where he's 45-2 overall. That's 44-0 against everybody else around the country, but 1-2 against Alabama. In all, Kirby went 1-5 against Alabama since becoming Georgia's head coach. The interesting part is that 1-5 record came while Nick Saban was the head coach at Alabama. Of course, that is no longer the case. Saban retired in January, as we all know, and Kalen DeBoer was hired to take his place. And in many ways, DeBoer is the opposite of Saban and Smart, right? He's offensive-minded, a little bit more even-keel personality. We aren't sure if he's ever uttered a cuss word in his life, but he's a winner. And that's the similar trait I believe all 3 of them share, or at least one of them, right? DeBoer is 107-12 as of this recording, and that includes many head-to-head wins over some of the game's top coaches. While at Washington, look this up, he was 3-0 against Dan Lanning, 2-0 against Steve Sarkisian, also 2-0 against Jedd Fisch, who won 10 games at Arizona last year before getting hired at Washington to take his old job. So you've got Alabama 2.0 in Georgia against this new-look Alabama program under DeBoer that is similar, but also not like what Nick Saban built while he was here for 17 years. I find that dynamic very fascinating. And then on top of all of that, this game is going to carry some SEC and college football implications, but maybe not as much as it would have in years past. The winner's going to own a crucial tiebreaker. I think that's important, but it's also still September, and the season, especially for Alabama, is really just beginning. They still have to play Tennessee, Mizzou, LSU, Oklahoma. 3 of those 4 games are going to be on the road. Georgia still has to play Texas, Ole Miss, as well as the Volunteers. 2 of those games are going to be on the road. There's a world where this is the first of 3 meetings between Alabama and Georgia, with the SEC championship game and potentially college football playoff meeting waiting in the future. This could also be the only meeting between these 2 teams this season. Unlike previous seasons, which is to say during the 14 playoff era, the loser of this game is not necessarily eliminated from anything, or the postseason, I suppose, is not necessarily on the ropes. The winner, I don't think, should also be crowned for anything other than winning what would be a crucial tiebreaker in the event that comes down to it. We're going to react accordingly because that's what we do. But this really kicks off what's going to be an eventful and exciting couple of months of college football, especially in the SEC. Do we have any thoughts on all of this? Did I cover everything? Did I miss anything? What do we think? Mike, I'm going to throw it to you first.
Yeah, this whole idea of like Alabama being different. They are. I mean, it's obviously a different feel. I got asked this question by our Georgia writer, Jordan Hill, like, what's different about this team? Like, this still feels like the 2023 Alabama team. Like, Jalen Milroe's still the quarterback. Like, you watched them play. Like, it's not absurdly different to what we saw last November from this offense, even from the defense. Like, it's not it's not a huge difference, like in terms of what we're seeing, good or bad. Like they were good by the end of last year, but it's not like watching Kalen DeBoer's Washington team. I just went back and looked at Michael Penix's stats the first 3 games of last year. 450 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 409 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 473 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. Like it's not Kalen DeBoer's Washington team transported to Alabama. That's not what this is. This is Alabama's 2023 team tweaked with some different philosophies, different vibe around the building, but still kind of feels like Alabama here. And that's Georgia's still Georgia. It's been a while since Kirby Smart has been in Alabama. It's been almost 10 years now. Like he has his own program. It still feels like Georgia. It's still Carson Beck. It's still that offense. It's still that defense and what they feel like is important with their front seven. So I know there's kind of the storyline that things are flipped now, and it's like watching Alabama play something different than Alabama. But it still feels like last year to me, which could be a good thing for Alabama. It could mean that if you duplicate what you did in Atlanta last year, that you can have the same sort of success in this game. But I guess I'm just not totally buying into the whole like Alabama 2.0 versus new Alabama to me.
There's a couple things there, right? There's the notion that these first 3 games, in my mind, wondering were they a preseason? How much do we roll out of what is quote unquote new? Because we don't want to give those looks away in games we didn't have to. The South Florida game obviously was closer than expected. And maybe you could argue they should have done more. But Kane Womack has talked about the fact that this defense has not shown a lot of what it's capable of doing. I would guess, if you're being optimistic, really, that the offense is probably in the same position. I think some of what you're saying is right, Mike. Also, I would take a step even further back than that. I would argue that Georgia is Alabama 1.0 in that when Kirby left, he took that exact blueprint and has been a straight line the whole way through.
Right.
Alabama started changing when Kirby left, especially offensively, but even in the way they interacted with players. We saw how Nick sort of changed in that respect, but they morphed as a program and evolved, in especially at the quarterback position, where Georgia, I think, is essentially remained the same. So now is this Alabama 3.0 that we're talking about right now? I don't know, but I do think it is. Kirby's taken a blueprint that worked a long time ago. It's still working right now. I don't want to take anything away from him, but I think Alabama changed even from the moment Kirby went to Athens.
And I thought Chris Hummer did a good job writing that, for 247 this week, where like Georgia hasn't really recruited big time receivers lately. They've kind of plucked guys from lower down the totem pole in the recruiting rankings, but they've really put a lot of resources into their lines, their front seven, their tight ends, obviously with Bowers and Darnell Washington, they have another good tight end coming in next year. So they built it from the inside out. They don't have a Ryan Williams. They don't have that sort of explosiveness on the outside, but still one of the best passing offenses in college football the last couple of years, with Brock Bowers, but they didn't have, top 10 talents at wide receiver. So to me, that's going to be one of the big storylines, as Cody and I were talking about before the show. Like, how does Georgia move the ball? Especially if their running game is not effective, then what do we see from Carson Beck without Brock Bowers like they had the last 3 meetings against Alabama? So that's a big question to me, but Carson Beck also is really, really good. And just when you think Georgia's offense is kind of plodding and, they're not kind of what they should be, then Carson Beck's going to drop 300, 400 yards on you. He had some great games last year, just super efficient, 313 yards against Auburn, 389 against Kentucky, 306 versus Ole Miss, 315 versus Florida, 298 versus Tennessee. Like, he can put some yards on you, even without, kind of this explosive downfield passing. So, and they didn't have Bowers for some of those games last year. So I would still be careful with potentially underrating Georgia's offense, even if it doesn't super flashy.
DeBoer called Carson Beck elite. Kane Womack called him one of the best quarterbacks around. I don't think they're underestimating what he's capable of. But when you talk about what's different from a year ago, I think Ryan Williams is what's different. When you talk about what Georgia doesn't have versus what Alabama does, a proven downfield threat. And it's crazy to think about the dude's only 17 years old.
Well, and I think We've talked about this too, just Alabama's offensive brain trust and just kind of the minds that have surrounded Jalen Milroe and the playbook and the play calling. Like, I think that's different too. The Ryan Williams element is a big part of that. And I think that's played into a lot of Alabama's explosive plays through the first 3 weeks of the season. I think you could see that last year, it really wasn't until the bye week that they kind of figured out what's the best version of this offense look like. And maybe this year's staff saw that and said, okay, let's lean more into that, or whatever the case may be. But like, you kind of knew right away from the very first week that like, okay, this is what this offense is. They're going to lean into it and kind of add things to it. I'm kind of curious from an Alabama perspective, what more do they add to it? Because I think Alex is right. Similar to the defense, I don't know that the offense has really showed a lot, mostly because I don't know that they've had to, right? Like, Jalen Milroe is probably going to run the ball. You know that they're really going to lean into the run game, whether it's Milroe, Jam Miller, Justice Haynes. They've been very good and efficient about that through the first few weeks. Can you do that against Georgia? We'll get into that. I think they can. And if Georgia offers a counterpunch, what's your next move? Because it'd be easy to say, okay, you can go deep against Ryan Williams, but like Malachi Starks is still in that secondary. Georgia's going to do their damnedest to take away that explosive play. Okay, what's the next thing, right? Like, what are you going to do to attack that if they take the run away and they take the deep shot away? That's what I'm kind of most interested in seeing from this Alabama offense coming up in this game. What's the next install, right? Like, what are you going to be able to do? What do you want to do? Can you do it against a defense that is not only loaded with talent, but they have the speed to match? Like, I think that was one of the takeaways from the Wisconsin game. If you watch some of those end zone views, Wisconsin just simply did not have the speed to hang with Milroe and Jam Miller. Georgia's going to have the speed to hang with those guys. So you're going to need a pretty solid counterpunch if you're going to want to keep moving the ball efficiently.
Well, and I think that's what you do is you use that speed and aggressiveness against them. And you do the thing that I've been talking about for a few weeks now that I've wondered why is missing from the offense, which is, where is the screen game? Where's the jet sweep game? Where are those things that DeBoer and that staff has hung their hat on for a long time? Is that we don't want to do much of that because of our personnel and what Jalen Milroe's good at? Or is it we're holding it back for the right scenario? I think what you've set the table with is that could be your counter punch for Georgia potentially.
And I mean, this gets into what I wrote today about Jalen Milroe and kind of DeBoer kind of walking the fine line when he talks about him, about we got to respect and use what he has, which is the ability to break some huge runs and obviously the explosibility as a passer, but they've got to use other people around him too. And they haven't really done that a whole lot this year. I mean, only 25% of the plays that Milroe's been on the field have been completions to other players. 37% of the time, Milroe's been the only guy to touch the ball, whether it's been an incompletion, a sack, or him running. So they're not using a lot of those players around him. And that's something that Kalen DeBoer has, again, very carefully talked about. He did it couple weeks ago, said we've got to do a good job of evolving it around other players and using the skill players around him. Look, I think the blueprint for Georgia is defensively what South Florida did. Like, they contained him as a runner and they got the pressure on him. They got him to make bad decisions in the pocket at points. An 18-yard sack, I think, was a bad decision. Georgia has the guys to do that, like probably more than South Florida does. So, and that, I think Kirby's known that since last year. And I'm sure he spent the entire offseason trying to figure out a plan on how to stop Jalen Milroe. I think he even mentioned it at some point during the offseason. It might have been the golf tournament in Hoover, where he said, like, we've got to figure out how to stop a mobile quarterback. So they're going to have a plan. And I think that's what you want to do. That's what Bill Belichick always did, was make the other team take away what they do best, make them play left-handed. And I think it's pretty clear right now that Alabama does that quarterback run game the best for the most part. I think DeBoer has indicated they might be doing it too much. And so it's finding that balance, as DeBoer says, and pulling back. And that's what Jalen needs to do, I think, more. And he's done it a little bit. Kind of fake the run, get the defense to swarm him, pull back, throw to the open receiver. Like he did that, I think it was Kendrick Law in the first game. That's, I think, what DeBoer probably wants to see more than Milroe just tucking the ball and running all the time. The pump fake, I think, is also a good option in terms of trying to make the defense do something different and not just swallow you up. So they're going to need a counter punch. That's, again, what DeBoer said last week. It's going to continue to evolve as the season goes on. People will adjust to us, and we've got to counter back with schemes and continue to build our philosophy around Jalen. So this is going to be a big game for that, because I think Kirby's going to be ready for what they want to throw at him.
That's a good segue into Saturday's game. Again, 6:30 kick, ABC, 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern, if that's where you live and you're listening from, which we appreciate if you are. What matchups are we most interested in watching, or matchups do we think will decide Saturday's game? Alex, I'll throw it to you first. What intrigues you the most about this particular game?
It's not a one-to-one matchup, but I think the Malachi Starks, Keon Sabb, I think those two are going to go a long way in determining the outcome of this game. Who can make a play, whether it's in the passing game, but I think more importantly for this game, coming down, put a hat on the hat in the running game, because I think both teams are going to try to establish that pretty early on. Those are two of the best we've in the conference and in the country right now. Malachi is a special player, and Keon Sabb has shown himself to be exactly that too. So I think, to me, those guys on the back end containing the big play, but also finding a way to create a turnover, I think could really go a long way in determining this game.
We saw how crucial turnovers were in the SEC championship game last year, right? I don't know if it was kind of like a weird reverse thing that Georgia was trying to execute deep in their own territory, ended up fumbling the ball. Trez Marshall jumps on it, and Alabama didn't really do anything offensively with it, but they were already in field goal range. Alabama made the field goal, ultimately won by 3 points. So we saw how crucial turnovers can be. I think those two guys are probably leading candidates in terms of creating a turnover or, going and hunting takeaways. We've seen them both do that, I believe, opening weeks of the season, right? Malachi Starks had that impressive interception where he kind of got turned around on the sideline on a deep shot that Clemson tried to take. I feel like he does that every season. And then obviously Keon Sabb had his 2 interceptions against Western Kentucky. Mike, what matchups or players or things will you be watching on Saturday in terms of what you think might decide the game?
To me, it's Mike Bobo versus Kane Womack. I think that's in kind of the extension of Bobo being Carson Beck, who's a really experienced, accurate, cerebral quarterback that knows what he's doing, versus Kane Womack, who has obviously shown some good things these first couple of weeks, but he's much less experienced on this sort of stage. I mean, he had a few games at Indiana against big teams, South Alabama when they played non-conference, but like in the SEC, to be an SEC defensive coordinator against a very experienced coordinator in Mike Bobo and a very experienced quarterback, they're going to be, again, with 2 weeks to prepare and really the whole offseason to prepare, like they're going to be seeing things and doing things to you that are going to be exploiting your weaknesses. So how Kane Womack responds to that, I think, especially the in-game adjustments is going to be a big story, and how the younger players, particularly Xavier Brown, chiefly, gets that message from Kane Womack and adjusts to whatever they're seeing. That's going to be a big deal, because it just takes one mistake, one communication mistake, and Georgia gets behind you. It doesn't matter who they have at wide receiver. It could be you or I, and you're wide open. Carson Beck's going to find you. So that's a problem, I think, because that Georgia, and it's not Todd Monken. Todd Monken's a really, really good play caller. I don't know if Mike Bobo's quite at that level, but it's still like they can do some things to you if they see something. And Kane's defense is going to be aggressive. That's what they want to do. They want to ball hawk. They want to strip the ball. They want to jump the route and pick you off. It's not Nick Saban's defense. So is there a downside to that? I think that's a question. Is there a look that they can give you that you think, all right, I see something, I'm going to jump it. And then you jump the route and boom, they know that you're ready to jump it and they have something else up their sleeve. It's that sort of thing that I would be a little bit concerned about. I'm sure, Kane mentioned meeting with Nick Saban. I'm sure Nick Saban has a lot to say about Bobo's offense and what Georgia will do, and is probably giving him pointers on that. But this is somewhat uncharted territory for Kane, where I don't think it's quite as uncharted territory for Bobo. And in general, that's the story of this game. Like, this is new for Alabama. It's a new staff. It's a new system. This is a established, experienced Georgia team. Like, that, I think, is worth something to Georgia in particular.
And to follow up on that, Alex, you wrote a really good story on Kane Womack this week, just about the idea of jumping to a Power 4 program, of being a Power 4 defensive coordinator, of kind of carrying on the legacy of his dad's 4-2-5 swarm defense. One, great timing on the profile, because 2, this seems like not the moment, but a big moment for him, for that defense, to show that they can do this against an offense that maybe hasn't fully found its groove yet, but we know because of the personnel that they have is a very, very dangerous unit. Just what more can you add to that, and how, I don't know if excited is the right word, but I would like to think that Kane is pretty amped for a challenge like this, just given everything that he's maybe poured into this. And then obviously the story that you wrote about everything he thinks about on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely is. And it's interesting because, everybody talks about the pressure on DeBoer following Saban, and that's absolutely true. But this program is identified with the defense, and that's Saban's thing. And in some ways, I think Kane has the most difficult comparison because he did take that defense and he made it different. I mean, he would argue it's not completely different. There's still some concepts that remain, but it is different. The way they match coverages is different. The way they line up is different. The way they call things is different. And taking that opportunity and acknowledging that opportunity head on, but also this is one of those prove it games for him in terms of, look, he's been in his dad's shadow his whole life, looked up to him. His dad built this defense. It's modeled off of Gus Bradley's Seahawks defense, which was modeled off of Monty Kiffin's defense with Tampa 2 and everything. But Kane told me, like, everywhere that his dad has been, everywhere that everyone underneath him has been, kind of had a little bit lesser talent than what they go up against all the time. And now he doesn't have to deal with that. So this is literally, can I take this defense that I really believe in to the most resourced, most talented place and go beat the best teams in the country? You're going to do that. You're going to do that this weekend. Now, I'd argue they lost a lot on that side of the ball. It may be a little bit difficult to do that in year one, but this is kind of why he came to Alabama, was to show this thing works. This thing that I really believe in can work. And it's going to be really interesting to me to see how Georgia tries to attack that, because it is unique within the SEC. Nobody else runs this. How do they want to kind of go at that? I think is, again, to go to Mike's point, what Bobo draws up with an extra week to prepare could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. A couple of different things that I think about when I think about this matchup. One, Alabama is finally going to play a quarterback that, the only way I can probably describe it, or the way I've been regularly describing it, is like Carson Beck scares me, whereas the other quarterbacks that Alabama has played did not really scare me. I was excited to see them play Tyler Van Dyke because he's experienced. He's a guy that can make the throws. He's in an offense that I thought would be able to maybe elevate his strengths a little bit. And then he gets hurt 7 plays in. So then it's kind of like, shrug. Okay, there goes that stress test. This is not a stress test. This is an actual, like, holy crap, that's a dude on the other side that can elevate the unit around him and that can beat you with his arm. I'm very excited to see how Alabama's defense as a whole plays him, but also particularly this new look secondary. We finally get to see a test against a quarterback that's really going to go after these guys, go after this new look secondary, and really kind of test their communication and their overall playing. The other thing that really, I go back up to that phrase, that scares me about this game is Trevor Etienne from Georgia. I think that this dude could be in for a very big game. He missed the first game of the season for Georgia against Clemson. And in case you guys didn't know, Georgia has a lot of dudes on that roster. So Nate Frazier, a freshman running back, carried the load against Clemson in week 1 and looked very, very good doing it. Since Etienne has been back, he's rushed for 157 yards in 2 games, right? I think the thing that really worries me about Etienne is that he's also a receiving threat. And while this might be a slightly different defense from what Nick Saban ran, it's still a lot of the same personnel. And I like the linebackers. I think we all do. Deontay Lawson, Justin Jefferson, Jihad Campbell, very good players. Routinely, they showed last year that they kind of struggle to cover running backs as receiving threats, especially in the Rose Bowl, right? So I think Georgia's going to come in and try to run the ball, because you looked at the first 3 weeks, that's Alabama's weakness, which means a lot of Trevor Etienne. It also wouldn't surprise me to see Etienne being used as a receiving threat out of the backfield, because that's an area that Alabama has shown that maybe they haven't improved a lot in. I know that he hasn't been used as a receiving threat a lot so far this season. We're only 3 games in for both of these teams, but his couple of years at Florida, he was used out of the backfield as a receiver. I think this could be not the breakout welcome to Georgia game for Trevor Etienne, but it wouldn't surprise me if the formula for a Bulldog win involves a lot of Trevor Etienne, and maybe even to a lesser extent, a lot of Nate Frazier as well. I think Georgia can come in and run the ball on this Alabama defense. If they can't stop it, they could shorten this game, and then Alabama's explosive offense is a lot more pressure on that side of the ball if they don't have enough time to maybe, try and sustain drives, which is something that I know they've been trying to do.
I watched a lot of Trevor at Florida, and I won't say he's an elite back because the production doesn't say that necessarily, but he has elite traits. When you talk about being a complete back who catch the ball backfield, run between the tackles, explosive on the outside, he is the guy that kind of scares you, and you're just waiting for that, again, the welcome to Georgia moment. I'd push back a little bit. The game where Alabama struggled the most defending the run was probably South Florida, but that was against a really athletic quarterback who liked to run the football. That's not going to be the case on Saturday. I think in some ways, yes, the focus is going to be on Lawson and Campbell to stop that, and to another extent, probably Malachi Moore. But can the defensive line keep hands off of the linebackers? They've played really well to this point, but this is a game where if they can win in the trenches and really control the line of scrimmage, that would go a long way. And oh, by the way, Georgia's going to be without their All-American and Tate Ratledge up front. So I think the D line is going to be as important as anything else in this game.
I think that matters because, especially in the case of a guy like LT Overton, who looks more and more like the potential candidate to be maybe not the game wrecker, but the guy that can maybe take over a series or two in the middle of games. He's played really well to this point in the season. He really flashed against Wisconsin. Can you do that against SEC tackles? Can you do that against a team that's as talented as Georgia, against a quarterback that knows how to navigate the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and really keep the offense moving in Carson Beck? Pretty big test for that guy as well. And yeah, I think that's just the chess match that's going to go along with Alabama's defense versus Georgia's offense, and vice versa as well. Like there's just so much in this game that is going to be worth watching. Mike, you have thoughts?
I mean, it's a good game, right? It's not like people are not going to be watching on TV, or 100,000 people in the stands, or college game days here. Like, this is why we all watch the game, because we're all interested in who's going to win and what's going to happen. So that's the fun part about it. And it is a chess match, and it is two teams that are really good and really good players on the other side of the ball. So it's some of it's just like, we got to see what happens. But I do think, there's, I think, capability for Georgia to run the ball. It's pretty rare. I mean, this is Saban versus Womack, but it's pretty rare that to have a opposing running back come into Bryant-Denny Stadium and really run it down their throat. I mean, Texas to some extent did it last year. Auburn maybe did it in the Iron Bowl a couple years ago. There's not too many 100-yard rushers against Alabama. So if they are able to run the ball, then I think Georgia's in really good shape. But at the end of the day, I still think they need to throw it and kind of slice up that secondary with Beck to really get this win on the road for Georgia. So, Alabama needs to run the ball well too. I think we can't forget about that. I think it's been here or there. It's been very uneven with the running game so far. The South Florida first three quarters, they were terrible running the ball, and then they all of a sudden exploded in the fourth quarter, and their stats look so much better now because of that. We barely saw Justice Haynes in that Wisconsin game. So we'll have to see how him and Miller do. I think you start to get into situations where you're not running the ball. You're in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 with Jalen Milroe. And I don't know if that's a great place to be against Georgia's defense. It wasn't with Bryce Young and Jamison Williams, some of the players they had back then. So I agree with Kalen DeBoer, and it's a little bit cliche, but I do think turnovers are going to play a huge role. I think this game could be a little bit shorter. I don't know if there's going to be 12 to 15 drives from each team where they're just going up and down the field. So lower scoring, controlled more by turnovers, and the punting game is going to be important on both sides. They both have really good punters. Field position, I think it's going to be a little bit of an old school game like that, but we'll have to see what exactly happens.
I just want to point out we've gone 30 minutes without talking about Alabama's offensive line. I don't think anybody's mentioned Alabama's offensive line.
One good game. Right. And I think part of it is maybe we don't view this Georgia front seven quite as fearsome as they were a couple years ago, but they still have Michael Williams, who's a damn good player, 1st-round draft pick. They still have Smile Munden. They still have Jalen Walker. They still got some dudes.
Georgia.
Right. So let's not forget that. I think we also maybe have a sweet taste in our mouth as opposed to sour from what this line did against Georgia last year, which is, Proctor, Booker, Roberts are all back. We don't have J.C. Latham. I think the right tackle spot's still a question mark, but yeah, it's definitely a storyline. It's just we don't know what it's going to look like.
I'm not saying they're not as good as they looked against Wisconsin. I just think it's premature to think that that's not an area of concern, especially against a defense that
Right.
brings to the table what it does in terms of 4 and 5-star talent along
Mhm.
the defensive line and the edge rusher. And again, look, I feel good about Proctor. He played really well in this game last year. He seems to be in a good spot. Pritchett is the guy when we're talking about like people to watch in this game. 1 start under his belt this season. Played
Mhm.
really well, but Wisconsin's not as athletic. 2 starts, I guess. Yeah, he technically did start.
One start at right tackle.
1 start at right tackle. But look, he's a guy who still has a lot to prove. And if you don't think Georgia is going to go right at him, you're kidding yourself. They're going to try to test him and test him early. So I think this offensive line, as much as the Wisconsin game was their coming out party, this is the game where it's like, okay, prove that that's what you are against elite competition, because frankly, Wisconsin was not.
No. And on that note, I need to go. Enjoy the rest of the show and have fun.
Appreciate you, Mike. Alex and I will wrap this up. I did want to continue that thought. Alabama needing to run the ball in a game like this, the offensive line obviously of crucial importance. Similar to how I think Georgia's going to be able to move the ball through their running backs offensively, I think I feel good about Alabama's ability to run the ball in this game. And a lot of that comes back to the fact that Kentucky ran for 170 on this Georgia defense. Now, that could be, I know people want to like poo-poo the idea that like sometimes athletes look ahead to other games, but like when you're dealing with 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old kids, that's going to happen sometimes. I'm not saying that Georgia looked ahead to the Alabama game while playing Kentucky. I do think there was maybe an element of that, and Kentucky maybe caught them off guard a little bit by not showing stuff through their first couple of games and showing stuff against Georgia. We know that teams have done that in the past against Georgia. And so the combination of things, to whatever degree they were pertinent, there's something to be learned from Kentucky running the ball for 170 yards. And I think there are things, I trust Alabama's offensive brain trust enough to believe that they can watch that film and say, hey, there are some things we can do that Kentucky did. And I kind of agree with Mike's thought that this could be a shorter game because I think both teams are going to want to run the ball and kind of attack, I guess, this game through the trenches. And obviously Alabama's offensive line is a huge part of that. Can they? I suppose we'll see. I don't know. I feel pretty good about their odds just between Milroe, Miller, and Haynes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. And I agree. I think if they weren't looking forward, if Georgia wasn't looking forward to Alabama, they were looking forward to the bye, a week off, and Alabama. I mean, you are talking about young kids, and how many weeks off do you really get? And I know it's not a full week off or anything like that, but going on the road to night game, it was really weird. It was the perfect trap game, but at the same time, it's not like the light switch came on at halftime and suddenly they were the number 1 team in the country again. That did not happen. So you can look at that and say, okay, is there something we can build off of there? And especially given the fact that what we've talked about, there has not been a statement, here's the running game the way we thought it was going to be game. Like there have been moments, there have been big plays, but we haven't seen Justice and Jam in a drive just kind of just march down the field. Will they be able to do that against Georgia? I don't know, but I think they're going to try. I think you want to establish that, especially at home, especially when you're still trying to find what you are offensively and in the passing game. And it helps settle that offensive line in too. So there's a lot of benefit there. And again, as good as the passing game has been in explosives, if you add the threat of real play action, it could be even better. So, yeah, I definitely think this is a game for Jam and Justice to sort of prove that they are who we thought they were.
Georgia's going to do their damnedest to make Alabama play left-handed, which is to say, I think they're probably just going to put Malachi Starks deep and try to take away the deep threat and make Alabama beat them running the ball. That's where the idea of the counterpunch comes in. I think play action could be the perfect answer for that if they're able to establish the run early to get Georgia kind of off kilter a little bit. And so that means, can this be the big Jeremy Bernard game that we've been waiting for? Can this be, I know DeBoer has talked passionately about tight ends. Is this a game where we see one of those tight ends truly become a receiving threat? Like, do we get to see CJ Dupree catch 4, 5, 6 passes over the middle of the field? Do we see last year in the SEC championship game, it was Isaiah Bond out of the slot that really torch Georgia on one of those touchdown drives that Alabama was able to score and not quite ice the game, but that really put them in a position to be able to ice the game on their next possession. Can Kobe Prentice be that guy? Can Kendrick Law, can this be the breakout Kendrick Law game? Like, who is the second or third skill guy that's going to step up in a game like this? I think that's going to go a long ways. I think if one of those guys does that, Alabama's going to probably feel pretty good about where they are offensively. If not, it could be a really long day for that offense, man.
Yeah, and Georgia knows what it's doing. They're going to try to take away Ryan Williams, and they're going to try to take away Jeremy Bernard. They know those are their top two threats. So I think, to me, is this a Kobe Prentice game? Is this a Kendrick Law game? And again, we've talked about how great Kendrick has been in the running game. He's been a fantastic team player in that respect, but he's got one catch. And all offseason, we heard about the strides he was making.
He's got 3 total touches.
Yeah,
3.
it's insane. For a guy who brings so much to the table in a variety of ways, running the football after the catch, you can motion him into the bat. There's a lot you can do with that guy. Maybe this is the game where he kind of breaks out. But yeah, I just have a feeling that they're not going to let Ryan Williams or Jeremy Bernard beat them. It's going to have to be somebody else.
I grew up in Kansas City, so I got a lot of friends that pay closer attention to the NFL than they do college football. And I've been telling people for the last week and a half, this is an NFL type game. There's enough talent. The guys are going to hit ridiculously hard. They're going to play ridiculously fast. They may not pay a lot of attention to football on Saturdays. This is one of those games that you got to circle, sit down on your couch on Saturday night. And you got to watch this game because there's going to be a lot of things to watch, obviously, as we've touched on here, kind of bouncing around things that we're going to be paying attention to on Saturday night. I'm really excited for this game. The last topic I really wanted to bounce off of you guys, but since Mike bailed on us, Alex, I'll just pitch it to you. The idea that this game's huge. This game is big. There's probably going to be 10, 12, 15 million plus eyeballs watching this game on Saturday night. I said at the top that this game's going to carry SEC and playoff implications. The winner will own a crucial tiebreaker over the other. But really, and especially in the case of Alabama, because I know Georgia has already played Clemson. They already have an SEC win under the belt over Kentucky. This really is kind of the start of Alabama's season. I know you've alluded to this as well. The first 3 games kind of as pseudo preseason games. This game's going to carry implications, but it's not as do or die as maybe last year's SEC championship game or in the 4-team playoff era, where if you lose, your postseason hopes are more or less on the ropes immediately. The winner and the loser of this game, nothing's decided immediately. How do we feel about that?
It's a vibes game. It's not a playoff game. I mean, if you really care about the number 1 seed, and a lot of them, I mean, there's weight with that, right? You want to have the number 1 seed if you can. You want the bye if you can, but it's not the end all be all. It's just getting in. So to me, it feels like a vibes game, and it's weird because on the one hand, it's important to Alabama because there is so much change, and this is the first big test. And if you fail on a big stage like this, where's your confidence at? How do you recover, knowing that you've got all these big games that you've already alluded to coming down the stretch? If you're Georgia and you lose this game, it's like my God, can we ever beat Alabama? Not just that. If we can't beat Alabama when Nick Saban's gone, what are we doing? I feel like there's a certain amount of pressure on Kirby Smart to keep them down while they're down. And it's not to say Alabama's even down, but they're in limbo, right? Until they go out and win another national championship, people are going to say, "Oh, well, what does Nick Saban leaving mean?" So you have to take advantage of that if you think you are the top program in the conference. So there's this long-term implication for Georgia if they lose, and there's this short-term implication for Alabama if they lose. And to me, it's more, again, vibes and mentality than it is, oh no, we're going to drop to X number in the rankings and we can't crawl back from that. You can. I mean, they're going to be fine either way. But I do think there are implications on both sides.
This to me, for I think both teams, but probably more so for Alabama, this is like that first quarter of the semester test that's worth 7% of your grade. It's not going to make or break your grade in the end. If you ace it, it's going to help you probably maintain a high B or a low A or even an A in the class. If you fail it, you still have a shot to salvage, I think, the season. And there are lessons that you're going to learn from this game, win or lose, that are going to help you moving forward. But it's not going to tank the rest of the season. That's kind of how I viewed it. I was kind of playing around with the percentages there, because it's like, well, it's 10% of your grade and you lose it. You have to kind of be perfect to get an A, which makes a little bit of sense. But like, you could lose this game and really grow from it and learn from it. And if they end up running the table and going 11-1, that wouldn't shock me either. That to me would still be an A season. So kind of settled on 7% there. But I think there are a lot of elements about this Alabama team that we just don't know yet. I don't think we are going to learn a lot about some of those unknown elements in a game like this. And I'm excited, man. I'm really excited.
And to put a finer point on it, last year in Bryant-Denny Stadium, they lost a game in which, to use an old Nick Saban phrase, people wanted them dead and buried and gone. And they crawled back in a 14 playoff. It's 12 teams now. So the pressure in that respect is off. But it is interesting that coaches are not talking about it in that way. Kalen DeBoer is talking about, this is a big game, this is the kind of game you come for. They're not playing it down in any way. The former president of the United States coming, college game days here. All these things in a thing, you want to show well. But you also have to acknowledge that if it doesn't go the way you want it to, it's not the end of the world.
In that sense, it very much is an NFL game, which is, as someone who grew up watching the NFL a lot more than I grew up watching college football, I'm very excited about that prospect, because that just, again, I mentioned how many teams these two guys still have to play after this game. There's a lot of football left to play. And so win or lose, the season isn't over. If you win, it's not like, you have a tiebreaker. That's great. You still got to go take care of a lot of other business to get to ultimately where you want to go, which I don't know. I know a lot of college football fans are going to feel a certain type of way about it. I think by the time we get to the playoff, they might even whisper this. They might even enjoy.
Well, all you need to know is look at the team Alabama's playing. It was criminal that they didn't have a chance to go win a national championship last year because they lost to Alabama in an SEC championship game. It's insane when you step back and look at that. Because of when they lost, they couldn't get into the playoff. And again, if you ask me, if they were in the playoff, I think they could have won the whole darn thing. So this is the solution to that. Now, does it render some games a little less important? Yes. But I think when we walk into that stadium on Saturday evening, it's going to feel like any big game we've ever been to, which is a really good thing.
I'm excited. I think a lot of other people are equally as excited as we are, but it's going to, I don't know, being in the building, I'm very excited to kind of feel that playoff-like atmosphere again. Alabama, Georgia, 6:30 p.m. on Saturday. Going to be a blast. That's all we've got today, guys. We will be back Sunday to recap this mammoth matchup. Whatever happens, it's going to be exciting. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 24/7 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports. You can catch all of our great coverage coming up before this game, as well as during and after this game. We don't want you guys to miss a thing, so take advantage of that. Put a link to it in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.